Hi, it's Billy Schoenberg from Forio Business Simulations, and this is week 5 of 6 of the Web Simulation Development Fundamentals using Forio Simulate. So today what we're going to be covering is our multiplayer games. And I want to do a quick sound check before I go too much further. Sorry for doing that right in the middle here as I'm getting started, but I just want to make sure everybody's able to hear me. If you all can hear me, one of you, two of you, just say, yeah, you can hear me, and I'll continue on. Okay, so it sounds like I'm being heard out there. So today, what we're working on is multiplayer games. And so let me give you a little bit of detail about exactly what we'll be doing today. So for multiplayer games, there's a bit of vocabulary. I know it's a little bit like grammar school. You know, you get your vocabulary lesson and then your spelling lesson. Today, we got to start with the basics, with the words, so that we can be speaking the same language. Then after that, we'll go into a bit of modeling techniques. So, there's a large portion of multiplayer that's all about the UI, but there's a small portion that we got to cover in the models to make sure that you're writing models that are prepared and ready for multiplayer games. Then we'll go into the user access tab, and we'll really get into how you set up users and teams, teams being one of those vocabulary words I was mentioning before. Then we'll go into techniques for advancing and resetting the simulation. So there's different ways that you can do that in a multiplayer game when there's multiple people all interacting within the same simulation. We'll also get into storing and viewing data from multiplayer runs, just like we do with single-player runs, but I just want to show you how that works. And then finally, some of the cool stuff around chat, so that you can have all these people who are playing in this multiplayer game all talking to each other while they're doing it. That way they don't have to be sitting next to each other. So without further ado, let's jump into the vocab. So these are the important words here: users, roles, teams, groups, and facilitators. And some of these might be familiar to you because I've been using them throughout the past couple of webinars. But just to cover and make sure that I've covered all of my bases here, users are people who use the simulation, and they're only allowed to see results generated by themselves or their team. And so what that really begs the question of is what's a team? And a team is a group of users, so is a collection of users who are all interacting together in the same simulation run. So if you remember before from a couple of weeks ago, a run is a simulation that starts at the beginning of the simulation and ends when the simulation in the same run. They're said to be on a team. And teams are represented by integers, numbers. So you could be team 1, team 2, team 3. And you set up teams on the user access page. Inside of teams, there are roles. So each user has a role within the team. And roles is no more than a title, which is given to the user by the author of the simulation. And the authors define what a role actually means. But from Simulate's point of view, from the software's point of view, if we're going to anthropomorphize our software here, a role is only a title. It's just a string property attached to a user. And of course, you can assign users on the you can assign roles on the user access page based on information that's entered inside the model. And so that's what I'm going to show you next. Finally, let's get towards group. And a group is a bunch of users and facilitators who are sharing the same simulation parameters. So if you remember last week, we ended off doing something called a set default run. And when you set a default run, that's being set for the group that you're in. So if you're a teacher, think of groups as classes, as sections. So the 10 o'clock section is group A, the 11 o'clock section is group B. That way you can give them different default parameters and give them different facilitators so that your TA for your 10 o'clock class can grade all the results coming out of the 10 o'clock class, and your TA for the 11 o'clock class can grade all the results coming out of the 11 o'clock class. And then finally, the facilitator. And so a facilitator is a person who uses the simulation and is allowed to see results generated by themselves or any user in their group. So a facilitator is a TA, a professor, a workshop leader, something like that. So now that we've established a common vocabulary, I'm going to be using these words a lot: users, role, team, group, and facilitator. And so if you're confused about what I'm talking about, this is what I mean when I mention these words from now on. So let's get into some of the multiplayer modeling techniques. And then let's just, for right now, propose just a dead simple model. We have a range called departments, and we're modeling just spending within a company. And our company has two departments, HR and operations. And I just contracted them to be nice and short so that they're easy to type. And then in our model, all we're doing is we're allowing people to spend within the departments. So that there's two ways that we can make this game multiplayer. So what we would want to do for this game in a multiplayer game is we would want to have one person playing as HR and the other person playing as ops. So there's two ways that we can turn on multiplayer for this particular model. The first one is using this phrase over here, the M multiplayer roles range equals departments. So if you read that, it's saying multiplayer roles, so choose the roles that are going to be allowed to be assigned in this simulation based on the range departments. And so what that means is that there will be two roles in the simulation, HR and ops. And so there's some pros and cons to this approach. The pros is it works great for arrayed models, especially when one of your array ranges is actually the multiplayer roles. Cons, it requires arrays, and then the role names, like HR and ops, become your array subscripts. So if you wanted to have a more detailed role string, like human resources as opposed to HR, you would have to change your model if you're doing a multiplayer roles range way of specifying roles. The other way to specify roles is to add to your model something called M multiplayer roles, where you give it a comma-separated list of all the roles in your model. And so what you can see here is this is usable in any model without making any changes to the model. So if you have just a regular Excel spreadsheet that you've imported, which has, price and revenue, and you want there to be two roles, the pricing manager and the revenue manager, I don't know, that doesn't really make sense, but you get what I'm going for. You can just do that by typing in M multiplayer roles equals pricing manager, comma, revenue manager. So it's great that it's widely usable everywhere. Its downside is that it just completely ignores the array structure that have been built into models if there is an array structure. So let me show you two options for the model that we're going to be building today. So here's option one. It's just a very simple model where we have spending on HR, spending for ops. We have an ROI for our spending for HR, an ROI for ops, and then we can calculate our revenue for HR. So our spending for HR times ROI for HR gives us our revenue, and then same thing for ops. And so what you can see here is that there's really a large opportunity to array this model. Since we're just doing the same thing for HR and ops, and we're making doubles of every variable, what we can do is make it arrayed like this. We can say there's a range called departments, and there's HR and ops, and then there's spending, ROI, and revenue for each one of those departments. Now, if you look here, what we have is we have the multiplayer roles. We're using the second technique that I had mentioned, the one that allows you to be a whole lot more precise about your roles, be completely arbitrary with your roles. And we're using that technique here, whereas in this model, we're using the multiplayer roles range technique. We're saying pull all of the multiplayer roles from this range called departments. And so for today, I'm actually going to use this model because it's the simplest, cleanest model as opposed to this model over here. So let's, I guess, go back to the presentation for a second. And there we go. And let's get started here in Simulate. So I'm just going to put this back up on the screen for a second for you guys to remember. There's two ways to make a simulation a multiplayer simulation. There's the multiplayer roles range, which refers to a range in your model. And then there's the multiplayer roles, which is a comma-separated list of roles that you want to appear in your simulation. So now let's get nice and specific here. So here's Simulate. And I'm going to go to my simulations and quickly create a new one. And this will be workshop week 5. and continue on here. Great. And then I want to upload a new model and paste this model in. So you see here now that it's highlighted it nicely, my departments, and I've got my model. I can save it, check it out in the Model Explorer once it loads here. And so we can see in the Model Explorer that we have revenue for HR and for ops, and we've got spending and ROI. Great. So next what we need to do is actually turn this into a multiplayer simulation, because right now we haven't done anything different than we would normally do for a single-player simulation. And so this is the key thing that you need to remember in order to make your simulation multiplayer. You go to Settings, Features, and you select Multiplayer. This is a multiplayer simulation with multiple roles and teams. And so what that does is it tells Simulate that it's going to treat this simulation differently than it treats normal simulations. It's going to allow this simulation to be run by multiple people within the same simulation run. So now what we want to do is we want to create some users and teams in the simulation. We want to do some of the legwork so that once we build this simulation, we can test it. In order to test it, what we're going to need to do is have users who we can log in as in order to play the simulation. So to do that, let's go to the User Access tab. And you'll see here, we've got this new button, this Edit Roles, which appears when you have a multiplayer simulation. But let's just start with the typical way of importing users by going to the Import Users screen, downloading the Excel template, and opening it. And you see here that it gives us the ability to enter in email addresses for the users we want to create, first names, last names, passwords, teams, and roles. And so I've actually gone ahead and filled out one of these sheets already. So rather than boring you with typing, I'm just going to go directly to the sheet that I filled out and explain to you how I filled it out. So here I've created 4 users. And I've given them names, workshop 1 at Forio.com, workshop 2 at Forio.com. I've given them names, last names, and passwords. And so we don't necessarily need to fill in the teams and the roles now. And I generally prefer to fill in the teams and the roles through the manager interface because it's a lot easier and it avoids spelling mistakes and things like that, which I'm always prone to making. So this is the spreadsheet that I want to upload to create users in our simulation, 2 teams. Each team having 2 users, each team having 2 roles, HR and ops, each user having 1 role, either HR or ops. So let's go back to the Import Users screen and actually import that spreadsheet. And if I actually upload the spreadsheet, I'll be a whole lot more successful in importing users. And so here's the workshop 4, workshop 5. Great. And so here's our spreadsheet, and I'm going to upload that spreadsheet as opposed to a blank file. And now I get my new users. So it tells me it's going to be auto-generating usernames, and we don't necessarily care about that for each of these 4 users. We've got their first names, and they're all correct as we specified in our spreadsheet. Last names, all correct as we specified in the spreadsheet. And here are the passwords for these users. I have the option now to email these new people their passwords, but I'm actually going to leave this checked off for right now because I don't need to email these dummy email addresses login credentials that are just going to bounce back. So I'm going to add these people to my roster, and now they're going to appear here in my list of users in my simulation. And as you see right now they're not assigned to any team or any role. So let's take care of that real quick. Let's click the Edit Roles button and set up our teams and our roles. So let's put user Workshop 1 and Workshop 2 together on the same team. They're both on Team 1. Let's make Workshop 1 the HR manager and Workshop 2 the Ops manager. And then we can do the same thing now for users number 3 and 4. So let's put them on Team 2, and let's set our even-numbered guy to be Ops, and our odd numbered guy to be HR. So now what we've done is we've updated our users, and we've given them all teams and roles. So that way when they log into the simulation, we'll be able to identify them based on what their role is, and then do special things for the HR manager as opposed to the ops manager. So let's save these roles by clicking the button in the upper right, and everything's set. So at this point now, we're actually ready to begin building our simulation. And so let's get into the user interface designer and put together just a quick UI. And what I want to focus on in the next portion of the webinar is actually techniques for advancing and resetting the simulation. There's some complicated techniques here that we can use, and some decisions that you as an author have to make when you're building your simulation. Like, do you want everybody to be, do you want one person to be the leader? Do you want one person to be able to force the simulation to go forward in time or reset? Or do you want everybody to collectively decide that they want this action to happen? And so I'm actually going to put all of that into one simulation so that I can demonstrate to you the differences between all of these techniques. So the first thing we got to do when we build a multiplayer simulation is we got to log in. There's no way right now to have a multiplayer game without logging into the simulation. So let's make a login page, and let's add a couple more pages. Let's add a page that the ops person is going to go to. Let's add a page for the HR. And then finally, let's add a page for our facilitators. Right now, this page will just be completely blank until we get to that later on in the webinar. But it's nice to lay out all of the skeleton of our simulation before we get started. Now, on the login page, we're going to want to add, of course, our login components. And you guys should be quite familiar with this. Add a component, premium components, login components. We can drag them out right here. And then we, like always, we go to the actions. Now, if you're looking at this, you can see here it says user destination and facilitator destination. So it's actually really easy to set up the facilitator destination. But what do we do about the user destination? Because what we want to do here is we want to direct certain users to the ops page, certain users to the HR page. And so we don't actually have that option right here, and it's kind of confusing. So there's a place where we can handle that information. And where we handle that is inside of the Document Settings panel on Login to Simulation. So here now we have the ability to specify conditionals that will affect what happens when a user logs into the simulation. So what we can say is go to the ops page when the person who logs in is equal to HR. Well, ops, actually, because we're bringing them to the ops page. So if you look at this again, remember the bracket $ syntax that I was describing to you last week, the bracket $ user.role. So what this is going to do is it's going to report back the information that we just finished setting up in the user access page, and it's going to compare it against the roles that exist in the model. And so if the user is the ops person, we're going to bring them to the ops page. If the user is then the HR person, we'll want to bring them to the HR page. And so now what will happen is we don't have to worry about this setting over here. It's just going to be superseded by these conditionals that we set up over here. And so now we've set up our login components. What we have to do next now is actually build what's going on in this game. So let's put together the ops person's page first. And the best way to do that is to lay out, a nice piece of text, letting the ops person know that they're ops. So, welcome to the ops dashboard. And let's make it big, bold, or bold and big. And there we go. And then let's actually, building off of some of what we did last week, let's put in the current run time in this. So welcome to the ops dashboard in whatever the current year is. So let's go to replacement values, run, and then time, or time formatted actually would be a lot cleaner. So let's add that. And so now we can type bracket $1 into our text up here, and it will print for us the current year. So welcome to the Ops dashboard. You're currently in year 10. So now what we want to do is we want to set up some information to the Ops person. And what we want the Ops person to be able to see is what their revenue looks like. So let's graph revenue for the Ops person. And it'd be nice if they could see what the total revenue for the company is. And that's what the star means. So if you see here now, we've got 2 lines on our graph, what the revenue for the total company is and what the revenue for Ops is. And so now I want to pause for a second here, and I want to explain to you a bit about multiplayer strategy when you're designing a game. So if you notice here in this drop-down list, I can graph anything. I can put any data on any page for any person. So what really makes a multiplayer game interesting is what information you choose to reveal to what players and at what time. That's what really separates a multiplayer game from a single-player game. It isn't so much that multiplayer games are some special entity where you only have access to certain bits of information. Simulate doesn't limit that. We leave that to you, the author, when you're designing your game, to make sure that when you're designing engaging content, that you use the ability of the UI designer to limit what information gets shown to what users. So right now what we're doing is we're limiting the Ops person's ability to see what's going on in the HR side of the company. And what that forces them to do is communicate with the person who's playing HR so that they can, if this was a teamwork and leadership simulation, so that they could develop teamwork and leadership skills. If this was a competitive war game, we could hide particular information about the competitor so that the user would be more inclined to make competitive decisions. So the information limiting is what really makes a multiplayer simulation engaging and exciting. That's what separates it from a single-player game. And so after getting up on my soapbox, let's get back to designing the simulation. And what we need now is the ability for our Ops person to make their decisions. So just to give you an example here, we can drag out a decision slider. And you see here that the UI designer doesn't limit our ability to have the Ops person set the HR spending. We can do that. That doesn't necessarily make sense, but it can be done. So that's what I'm saying, when I mean that multiplayer games are all about limiting what certain people can do based upon their role. So let me select Ops. So now what we have here is just the most basic simulation possible. We have, a slider, which the Ops person can use to change how much they're spending, and then a graph, which reports how they're doing. Now, if we were building a single-player game, what we would do at this point is add just a regular old step button so that people can advance forward in time. But this is a multiplayer game. We need people to advance together, separately. We don't know. So let's figure out how we want this game to work. And there's really 2 options. We can have people advance this game in a group. So what we could do, in a group. So to do that, we'll make a button that says ready to step. And what this user will do in there, ready to go to the next round, is they'll say ready to step. So if this is a cooperative multiplayer game where everybody goes into the next round as a unit, as a group, we use the ready to step action. So let me show you how that works. We go and we select the ready to step action, and we add it to the button. And that way, when people press this button, they're telling the server, I am ready to go to the next round. And because the simulation may not just jump to the next round, because in order for the simulation to go forward, both people on the team need to be ready to step. What we want to do is actually disable this button when a user is ready to step. Because if the user is ready to step, We don't want them to be able to, mash this button 100 times. We want them to know that the simulation has recorded their action and is actually waiting on the other player to go forward in time. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to make this button disabled when the user is ready to step is equal to true. And so we add that here now. And so when a user presses this button, it'll be disabled until the simulation moves to the next round. And this is in direct opposition to the regular mode of stepping that we do in single-player simulations. So let's say this isn't a consensus-based simulation. Let's say the ops person is super important, and they make all the decisions, and everybody just has to fall in line behind them. And they get to decide the pace of the simulation. What we would do then is just do a regular step action. So we would go to the Actions panel for this button and just do a step like we normally do. And what this does is, when the user clicks this button, it's going to force everybody else in this simulation to advance to the next round. And sometimes this is desired behavior, like when I was saying when there's a team leader or a CEO or something like that. But in a simulation like the one that we're currently building, this is a less useful method of interaction. Hold on one second as I get a drink. Great. So now we've set up and explored the two ways that we can advance the simulation. Let's also do the same thing with resetting. We have the same level of options. Do people want to reset the simulation as a team? Or do they want to reset the simulation as one particular person? Do we want one person to be able to dictate what happens to everybody else? So again, let's lay out two buttons. One for ready to reset. And then let's add another for just a straight up reset. And what I'll do is when we publish the simulation, I'll actually have the game open in two windows, and I'll click each of these buttons so that you can see exactly what it's doing. Don't worry if you're a bit confused right now, because there are a bunch of options when it comes to multiplayer games. Great. So now we've set up the page for our ops person. They can say, I'm ready to go to the next round. They can say, I'm forcing everybody to go to the next round. They could say, I'm ready to reset. Oh, and we forgot to set up our conditionals on this button. So let's also make it disabled when the user ready to reset is equal to true. And then we have the option here to force everybody to go back to time 0. So let's take this page, since everything on the HR page is going to be quite similar, and let's just paste it on the HR page and make our changes. So rather than welcome to the ops, welcome to the HR dashboard. Rather than showing revenue ops, let's show revenue HR. Rather than spending ops, let's do spending HR. And so now we've set up the most basic multiplayer game possible. The final thing that we want to do is give people a way to log in and log out of the simulation. And so to do that, let's put a logout button on the template so that it appears on all pages in the simulation. So let's go to Add a Component, Button, and drag it to the edge. And we'll make it logout. And what this will do is it'll make it a lot easier when we're testing the simulation so that we can easily log in, log out, all using the same window. And so let's make this button have an action for logging out of the simulation. And let's call this our logout template. Great. Now, though, if we go and we look at the login page, it has a logout button on it. So let's actually just make a blank template for the logout page. And we'll just call this one blank. And we'll apply that template to the login page. and that button goes away. Great. So now let's test the simulation. Let's make sure we've got everything going the way we want it to. So I'm going to hit publish right now. And once the simulation is ready, I'm going to take the simulation, I'm going to open up 2 separate browsers so that we can play the game. And so here's the sim. And so let me copy this URL and open up 2 other browsers on my computer, Chrome and Safari. So what's important to realize is that Simulate logins are site-wide. So when you log in to Simulate, within a simulation or within the Simulate Manager, you're logging in to the same place. So the reason why I'm opening up 2 new browsers is so that when I log in as those workshop users that I created, I'm actually not unlogging out myself, the author of the simulation. And when you're playing multiplayer games, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your users are in different browsers as opposed to different tabs. Because when you're within the same browser, all of your users are sharing the same state. So if you have one browser like Firefox and you open up 5 tabs and you log in as a user in tab 1, user 2 in tab 2, every time you log in as a new user, you're logging out the user who was in the previous tab and replacing it with the user who you most recently logged in as. And so since for a multiplayer game, we require that the people be logged in together for at least our game, we want to make sure we're doing things in separate browsers. So here, I'm logging in as Workshop 1. And here, I'm going to log in as Workshop 2. Great. So now here's the HR and the ops. And so I can make some decisions here. I'm going to really jump up my HR spending. I'm going to lower my ops spending. And so now let's systematically go through these buttons. And let me show you exactly what they do so that I can help clarify some of the questions that I probably arised when I built the sim. Let's just have the ops person do a step. And what we see here is that both screens advanced. We didn't have to wait for the HR person to say, I'm ready to go before the simulation went forward in time. So now let's test it out and make it so that we need both people to agree before the simulation advances. Here, I hit ready to step, and you see the game hasn't gone forward. It's only going to go forward when this guy hits the button, because now they're both ready to do it, and the game goes forward. So now, let's explore some of the reset options. So on reset, if I just do a straight up reset, I'm going to reset the game for everybody, including my other player, even though they have no say in it. So boom, now everybody is reset. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay in between your screens and mine. I just realized I looked over at my colleague's screen who has the webinar up. So as you see here now, by hitting that reset button without the ready to reset, I'm able to just control the simulation and you know, be the bossy player. So let's play again, and let me show you what it's like when everybody has to agree before the simulation gets reset. So let's change some of the spending. Ready to step. Ready to step. Great. And so now let's both agree to reset the simulation before the simulation resets. See, so at that point, we both had to agree that we were ready to end this game for the game to end. So now we've gone through a whole bunch of the techniques for advancing and resetting. So now what we want to do is go back and do some storing and saving of results. So let's minimize these 2 browsers and log out of them. so that we can reuse them later on when we do our testing. So since we want to be saving results, the first thing that should be jumping into your mind at this point is save results. Save results. You hear the little voice back there? Because what we need to do is we need to mark some of these variables to be stored in the database so that they can be reviewed by the facilitators. So let's make it so that our facilitator, in this case, can view all values of revenue. And so you see what I'm doing here is I'm saying all values of revenue. You know, the HR revenue, the ops revenue, they're all saved. I would also be able to save per subscript if I wanted to, but in this case, since I want to save everything, let's just do that. So now here, I am saving everything belonging to revenue. So now, what we want to do is we want to jump back into the UI and actually build some of the facilitator review screens. And on the facilitator review screens, we're going to do similar things to what we've done last time, except this time we're going to do a little bit of a twist. And this twist really doesn't have anything to do with multiplayer, but I figured it's a good way to introduce you guys to a different way of having facilitators view runs. So let's go ahead and just put down a regular old, at this point, somewhat boring run table. Let's not cover our logout button with it. And in this table, we're going to want to show the creation time. We're going to want to show the revenue, R, for HR, and then the revenue for ops. And then we're going to want to add a view run button and a delete run button. That way, when we're done looking at these runs, we can remove them from the list. And so now let's think for a minute about what happens when people click that view button. What happens when people click that view button is it makes a copy of the simulation and then shows you all the results. And what it normally does is it directs you back to the page that the user is looking at. But here we have a multiplayer game where users are seeing different pages. You know, it's kind of weird. You know, should the facilitator be looking at the HR person's page when they view the run? Or should they be looking at the ops person's page when they are reviewing a run? And really, in this case, we don't want them to look at either of those two game pages. What we want to do is we just want to create a page just for the facilitator, which has all relevant information about a run. So let's add a new page, and let's call it the detailed info page. And on this page, let's just put down all of the information that a facilitator would want to see. So this page, only facilitators are going to come to. So let's put down, you know, revenue for HR, revenue for ops, and our good old revenue total. So we don't need that fourth series. Okay. And so now what we can see here is that we have our graph for our facilitators so that they can see all the results that are coming out of the simulation. Let's also give our facilitators the option to look at these results in tabular form, just using a regular old data table. And here, we can give them the same revenue for total, revenue HR, and revenue for ops. Let's make the page look a little bit cleaner. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. And so now all we need is the ability to go back from the detailed info page back to the facilitator page. So let's just add a button and back to review. And this is a go to page action to the FAQ. Great. So now let's go back to the facilitator page and actually hook up where the view run button is going. So here in our settings pane, we have the view run destination. And rather than having that point to a page that a user would look at, let's have that point to a page that only a facilitator sees. This way, when a facilitator wants detailed information about a run, it brings them to a page that has all of the detailed information about a run. And so at this point, we're missing just one last bit. If you remember, we haven't put in any save run actions. None of these runs are being stored to the database right now. So let's go and use our knowledge of how to do save runs and add them every time a user presses a step or a reset, a step button or a ready to step button. So now anytime the HR person presses a step-related button, it will save the game. And let's make the same happen for our ops player. Great. And so now, these runs will now be stored, so they'll show up in our run table. So let's hit publish. And then after we're done publishing, we'll refresh our other two browsers. We'll come in, we'll play the game. We'll look at some of our results, make sure that's working the way we want to. And then we'll round up the webinar with how to do some chat. And then we'll have a little bit more time for Q&A today, since this will be the last time that I'll be with you talking about technical UI things. So if you have any questions geared up that may be related to some past webinars, if you type them into the GoToWebinar box, we might actually have more time to cover them today. Great. So our simulation has been published. So let's bring up our two player browsers, and let's refresh them so that they get the latest version of the simulation. And let's start the login process. So here I'm going to log in as Workshop 1. And here, Workshop 2. And we're just going to play this game real quick. Let's make some, simple facilitator data so that we can check out and make sure that our fact pages are working the way we want them to. So I'm just making some crazy decisions. Right now, the presentation of the webinar is lagging just a bit behind my computer. There we go. And let's make one more set of decisions. And then we'll reset the simulation and make another. That way we have two runs that we can review in order to make sure that our run table is working appropriately. Boy, GoToWebinar is lagging a little bit right now behind where I'm at. Well, even though, there we go, great, your screen just updated. So let's quickly reset the simulation and start another set of runs. Great, and let's step forward. And on our other page here, we'll step. And so now we have two runs that look different. We have the run where everything is flat and the run where we have some behavior. So now it's perfect time to log in. And we see our two runs over here in our facilitator pages. And let's take a look and see what our results look like. So here now, we have a detailed view into how this team is performing. We can see exactly what's going on for this team. We can go back, and we can take a look and see how our other team is doing. And then, of course, we can copy all that stuff to the clipboard. and paste it in Excel and do some calculations and things like that on it. So we've got all of our Facilitator review screens set up. So let's finally hit our last topic for today, which is chat. So we go back to the UI designer, and you'll notice I left a little bit of room on our game and our ops pages for a chat window. And so chat, we find, is super useful for people who are playing the game who aren't in the same location. And to add a chat window, you go to the premium components. It's at the bottom there. Drag it out. And boom, we got our chat window. Let's copy our chat window and place it on our HR page. And now both of our players are able to do chat. So at this point, we publish a simulation, and let's test out how our chat is working. So as this is publishing, I'm going to go back and I'm going to open up my old two browsers. And once it's done publishing, what I'm going to do is refresh them. So I can see in the background over here that the publish is complete. So let's just quickly refresh both of our player browsers so that we get the most up-to-date Swift. And let's wait for both players to get back in. And let's log in. So here I'm going to make this guy's nickname Safari. And you know, he's going to connect. And we'll make this guy Chrome. And they can talk to each other. And if we check here, we can see that these two guys are able to talk to each other. And so these guys are now able to talk about what rendering engines they're using inside of themselves. A little bit of a silly example, but now you see that these people are able to talk about how the simulation is going for these guys, and now we can encourage communication through this chat channel. And so at this point, I just want to jump back into our presentation and talk a little bit about challenges for the coming week. Let's wait for your screens to catch up with mine again. There we go. And so what I want you guys to think about when you're building your multiplayer game, some techniques is that if you knew how to do them now would really save you a lot of effort when you go forward is you know, how would you add a CEO to this game? Somebody who had all the power in the game, somebody who was allowed to advance it and reset it at will. You know, how would you do that? And then finally, it'd be kind of cool to fill out the rest of this model logic, because right now if you look at this model, there's really not much going on inside of it. It's just a simple multiplication. So could you make it so that ROI depends a little bit on spending? So at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to have you guys ask any questions that have been queuing up in the past, and ask any questions that have queued up over today. And I'd like to answer a couple of them before I close out this webinar session and show you a bit about what's going on next week. And then next week, of course, Michael will be presenting again. So this is the last opportunity to get at me through the workshop series. Of course, you can always reach me through Matt or any of the support emails. Okay, so we have one question about, can chat content be saved and reviewed by the facilitator? So right now, this isn't possible, but this is actually a feature that's being implemented, I believe, this week or next within the Simulate platform. So there'll be the ability to, within the Simulate Manager, review any recorded chats that have happened in your group. But just to reiterate, right now, this isn't possible, but this is what we're shooting for in the next short-term timescale, week to 2 weeks, I believe. So then I've got a question here about the different browsers. So when we're talking about running this simulation as multiple people? Do we need to be in completely different browsers, like can I have 2 windows of IE and be logged in as the same person, or 2 windows of Firefox and be logged in as different people? And the answer to that is no. What you really need to do is like what I've done here, which is have 3 separate browsers. If you have 2 windows in IE, they're both sharing the same session information, the same cookies per se, and Simulate tracks who's logged in via cookies. And therefore, if you log in as somebody in window A of Safari and window B of Safari, or the same browser, you'll actually be logged in as the same person in both windows. So what really matters here is that they're different programs. Of course, there's ways to work around this technically using Firefox like profile managers, but that's a bit more complicated. And what I'd really encourage is that when you're testing your multiplayer games, you really stick with different browsers made by different vendors. And then, so we've got a question here. So with 4 people on a team, I need 4 browsers, or with 2 teams, 8 browsers. And so what it really means here is, let me get a little bit more specific about it. Let me actually just show you an example. So right now here I'm in Firefox, and let me just go to the Sim Showcase. And so you can see right now that I'm logged in as Billy Schoenberg. And if I copy this URL and open up a new tab here, and I sign out, if I come back and I refresh this page, I'm signed out here too. Both of these tabs follow the same state. So now, if I pull out and I make 2 windows, let me log in again. And all I'm going to do on this page is refresh it. And you see I'm logged in here. This browser, Firefox, is their sharing state. Anytime you're within the same browser, you are always logged in as the same person. So let me go into something like Safari and go to the Simulate homepage. And so you see here, I'm logged in as user workshop 1. So here, because I'm in a different browser, I'm able to maintain different login sessions. So again, it's important to be in separate browsers when you want to be separate people. And then to get at the rest of the question about 2 teams with 8 browsers, you're really testing 1 team at a time. So if you have a 4-person multiplayer game, you'll need 4 browsers to test that multiplayer game on your particular computer. Of course, when you're across multiple computers, let's say you've got, 5 people running the game on different machines, then the browser maker isn't important. It's all about, this browser limitation is only when you're playing 6 people on 1 computer. And then I've got a question now about, could you save each player's parameter decision or just the result of the decision in a step? And I'm actually going to ask if I can have a little bit of clarification on that question. So I'm assuming here that the question is around save results and how save results work. So if I come back to this simulation here, and I just got confirmation that that was, in fact, the right question. Save results, what they do is they store results in the Simulate database for all values of this variable. And then in the UI, you can review values for that variable that have been stored in the database. So if you want to be saving, for instance, a decision, so I'm seeing here, instead of just seeing the result of the choice, to actually see the numeric decision the player made. Let's go ahead and just do that. It's a simple operation. So let's make spending a save result as well, since spending is a decision that the user is making. So now we've gone through and we've said spending is a save result. Spending is going to be stored to the database. and viewable from within the admin screens. So I just saved that model. And if I go back to the interface designer, I'm actually able to now go to the facilitator page and I can add columns to show what spending for HR is and what spending for ops is. Now, I just want to point out something interesting here. This is a common pitfall that people hit when they're dealing with save results. They see this, and they see that these numbers are blank here for these 2 runs, and they go, uh-oh, Simulate's broken, and then there's a problem here. This is, in fact, correct behavior, and the reason for this is these 2 runs were run before spending was a save result. Therefore, Simulate didn't store any data when we were saving these runs for these variables. Therefore, there's no data to actually show back in the table. So now if we were to run a new run, any run from the point in time forward where we added the save results will have results for these numbers. So if we go back in the game, and in this case, I don't even have to republish my UI. I can just start a new run. And let me go back to the simulation here. Let's reset. Okay, and so both HR and ops are logged in. And so let's do just a quick step and a step. And then here, where we're the facilitator, let's actually just look at the facilitator screen. And we'll see now that there's an entry in the run table for this user. Sorry. Let me publish so that the facilitator can see the new columns that we added to the table. Bonehead move on my end. Alrighty, so our simulation is now published, and we'll be asked to log in as our facilitator. And see now here we can see what spending decisions have been made in this run. And so at this point now, we're reaching the end of our webinar. And so I just want to show you the rest of the presentation here about what's coming next. And our next workshop, our next and final workshop, is on game design and project management. And here we'll be covering how to create successful simulations, developing ideas for simulations, designing for your specific audiences, project planning, so how do you put one of these projects together, make sure you get it in on time, on budget, and testing, because that's always something that's really important to be doing. And like always, we want to help you through as you're developing your simulations. Forio.com/simulate is where you can get to the software. We'll be giving you links to the presentations, to all the models that I was showing you today, link to view and copy this model. And as always, you've been an excellent audience. Thank you for attending these webinars. I've had a good time showing you how Simulate works. Hopefully you can say the same. And have a great day.